Hi everyone. Okay, we're finally getting to the first video tutorial in After Effects. I think we have a system that's going to work quite well. Make sure you download the tutorials that I posted to Blackboard, and when you do that zip file, inside it you'll see a pics, vids, and audio folder. We're going to go into the vids folder and just do some very basic video editing in After Effects. And thanks to Brooke, we have a really nice summer scene here that I'm going to use. Hopefully we'll be able to do this kind of activity this coming summer. So we're just going to do some basic editing. I have After Effects already open here. And what I'm going to do is select all the videos that are inside the vids folder, drag and drop them into After Effects' project window, and there we go. And now I'm going to select new composition, and we're going to go with the standard video size of 1280 by 720, which conforms to film and HD TV. Okay, and that's what you should use from now on. I'm also going to go change the frame rate from 30 seconds to 24. I like the speed of film, which is 24. It's a little bit more romantic and a little bit more intimate and subtle than live video. For the duration of the composition here, in hours, minutes, seconds, and frames, we're going to say 0 hours, 0 minutes, and I'm going to go with 20 seconds and 0 frames. The background color we don't have to worry about. Okay. And let's see. There we go. I'm going to also place my cursor to the left of my composition window and open up a little bit more room. We don't need to see all the elements in the project window. That way we can see the timeline. We've got more room on the timeline. I can even bring the time down a little bit so we can see the full composition. And there we go. So we have all our elements ready to edit. And what I'm going to do is just create a very quick and simple storyline by bringing in each video and trimming it to the part that I want to use. Then I'm going to line them up chronologically and just use straight cuts to go from one to the other. And then what I'm going to do is add a couple of transitions. So basic video editing. And we'll start with Brooks. We're going to drag it from the project window to the timeline. And it looks like, Brooke, you captured it at 1280 by 720, which is good. I'm actually going to stretch it down. I actually might even scale it up a little bit. I can do this manually by dragging the points or typing S for scale and scrubbing the value just so we can hide that time code at the bottom of your video. The next thing I'm going to do is go all the way down to the bottom mountain ranges and zoom in to my timeline a little bit, and I can see that it's just under 2 seconds. What I want to do now is when I move the playback head to look at it, I don't want the part with the people. I actually want to begin the video at where he is just entering the water. So in order to trim that, I'm going to go to the beginning of the clip, and my cursor changes into a double arrow, if you guys can see that. Okay, and my playback head is at the part that I want to trim it to. Hold my shift key so that it snaps. You can see it snapping right to the playback head, and that means the video will be visible from this point forward. It's still there, but in the part of the layer that's just an outline, it's not visible. And now we can move it and play it till about right here, just before the hands come in. Right over here. I want to trim its out point. So we trimmed its in point. Now we trim its out point by going to the end of the clip. We get that double arrow, holding the shift key and snapping it. There we go. And good. Okay. Perfect. Now, one more thing that I want to do. I've shown you guys this in the past, but as a review, you can time stretch something to make it move slow motion or fast motion. So I'm going to simply, it's a really beautiful kind of image here, but it would look really nice in slow motion. So with the layer selected, I'm going to say layer, time, stretch. Okay, and we're going to stretch it from its layer in point, from the beginning point. We're going to stretch it. I'm going to stretch it 250%. So now, of course, it's longer, and now you can see the effect of it playing slower. There you go. I'm going to stretch it even more. Time stretch, let's stretch it 500%. So let's see what that looks like. I'm going to bring it back to the beginning of my timeline. It has to play through first to get into memory, and then it'll play through a second time. Now you see the effect of slow motion. That's really beautiful. Okay, so that's time stretch, and you can use it anywhere. The next clip that I want to bring in is I have a video, basically, of a Xerox machine. I literally put my iPhone inside the Xerox machine and recorded it while I ran it through. And so now what I'm going to need to do is scale it up so it fits the frame. Although you don't have to. It's kind of actually cool to have a video superimposed on a background. But we're going to talk about that later with compositing and layer blend modes and masks and everything like that. For now, I'm going to scale it up. And the aspect ratio is a little bit different than the dimensions of the frame here, and that's okay. I don't recommend scaling video up. In this case, I needed to because it was captured on a low resolution. On all of your iPhones, the quality should be good enough, so you won't have to. If anything, you'll need to scale it down, which is good, because then the resolution will increase. Now I want to basically move the playback head until the light just comes on, and I'm going to trim the video's in point like I did before. Beginning of the video, hold my shift key, snap, trim the end point, maybe right here. Maybe to right here. So now we just had that section of the video, and I'm going to move this holding my shift key to the right until it snaps. It recognizes the end point of my last video. So if we play this, beautiful. And I'm going to do the same for the rest of the clips. I'm going to line them up. So the next clip I'm going to do is the fire. And when you drag it into the timeline, I'm trying to drag it so that it's a top layer. It doesn't really matter which one it is. I like to do them this way in chronological order. Again, I'm going to have to scale this up so it fits the frame. It's not great quality. And I'm just going to stretch a part of it right up to this point. So there's a close-up of some fire that I took. I can zoom out of my timeline so we see the full 20 seconds. I'm going to trim it down a little bit. I'm kind of guesstimating at this point. And then the next clip is I'm going to go to the lantern file. Back in the early 1990s, I was at an artist colony in Temecula, California. Lived in a cabin without any electricity and had this lantern, and there it is. There's my lantern. And I'll trim this down a little bit for now. And then finally end up with my other brook, my bubbling brook. It's a scene that I took many years ago. I kind of like the way the sun and the colors reflect on this. Really beautiful image. And I may also decide to trim this down a little bit. As you can see right now, with the exception of the second clip, which is a Xerox machine, they're all about the same duration, okay, which is not the most interesting in the world. So one of the things for you to consider is when you are working on this video and doing some experiments, consider the duration of each scene to be part of the story that you're telling. In other words, if they're all the same duration, it's going to get predictable in terms of one change to the other. When you have some longer clips and some shorter clips, that certainly contributes to what you're trying to say. And of course, that's up to you. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to have my first clip. I'm going to go back to the beginning, and I'm going to have it fade in, and then I'm going to have my last clip fade out. So go back to the beginning. You'll also notice that 2 of the clips have little sound speakers attached to them. That's because I accidentally recorded sound with them. There's not much in the background, but I'm just going to turn that off. I'll post another tutorial talking about how to record sound and even compose sounds and music in After Effects. But now I'll keep them turned off. And I'm going to open up the transparency. I'm going to type T for transparency or opacity. Okay, and again, that's if I opened it all the way up under my transformations. I have the 5 transformations that you guys know. So I'm going to bring this down to 0 at the beginning. Click on the stopwatch to set a first keyframe on the timeline. Go to maybe half a second, which would be about 15 frames. Bring it up to 0 so that it fades in. And then my last frame, which is the bubbling brook, I'm going to type T, open up the opacity, and I'm going to have my playback head somewhere near the end. Click the stopwatch so I have 100% set. Go to the very end, bring it down. Now, because the video clips are small, I can hit the space bar and watch it play from After Effects. I don't recommend this because After Effects doesn't typically use a lot of memory to play everything unless you pre-render it. What I would suggest doing is actually rendering it out as a QuickTime movie. So we can actually see what it looks like as a rendered QuickTime file to see if the movement is really smooth. When you have a lot of video and a lot of images in After Effects and you play it from After Effects, it's going to look slow and choppy. So instead, what we're going to do, and you need to know how to do this anyways, is we're going to render this as a QuickTime movie. And so I'm going to take you through those steps again. We're going to say Composition, Pre-Render. So when we enter the render queue, which you'll see on the timeline, there are different settings that you should be aware of. I might have gone over this before, but I'm going to go over it again. The first thing is down here where it says Output 2. I'm going to click on Comp 1. That's the default name that it gives it. We can call it anything. I'll just call it Tests. Doesn't matter. We want to make sure the file format is QuickTime, and I'm going to save it right up to the desktop. Now, you've got 2 settings, Render Settings and Output Module. In both of these, you want to click the little arrow and go to Custom. And in render settings, you'll see above here, best quality, full, which means it's going to render it at the full size. But if you're working and you're not sure what your video really looks like and you want to see it play in real time, you can render it at half, a third, or even a quarter of the size to get a really small QuickTime movie that will render fast. The reason why you would do that is it would give you the benefit of looking at your work and seeing it in real time. So for now, we're going to render it at the full size. One more thing I want to mention is if you want to render something for the web, then usually the frame rate when people post things on the web is pretty small, between 12 and 15 or even as much as 8 to 10 frames a second. So you can change that if you want. I'm just going to point that out. Also under Output Module, we're going to go to Custom, and this is the important thing. Again, it's going to typically go to a QuickTime format. There are other file formats we're not going to worry about right now. Under Format Options, when you click this on your computer, at the top you'll see Video Codec, and codec stands for compression decompression. So like when you compress photos using JPEG compression, some of the data is taken away in exchange for a really small file size to post on the web. And the same with these codecs here. Now you can see I have a lot on my system. You may not have as many. But the most popular one that's used today is H.264. If you don't have that on your computer, go to Apple's website and download it. Alternatively, you could use MPEG-4 video. That would be the second best. Third best would be Motion JPEG A or B. But really, H.264 is the best for everything. Where it says quality, I'm going to turn it down somewhere in the late 80s. And what this does is it takes away some of the quality from the image. Not enough to be detectable by the human eye, but just enough so that it can spit out a much smaller file. Click OK. Okay, and by the way, there is no audio here. I can turn the audio output off. When you do have audio eventually, you want this turned on. Click OK and render. And now it's going to go through this. Now the reason why it's doing it so fast is because the videos that I have are very small in the first place. So when you upload your videos from your iPhone, I'm sure they're going to be much bigger and it's going to take more time to render. And the more, and that was in the key of B sharp. Actually, I'm not sure about that. Just kidding. But if you have a lot of videos in your animation, and if it's long, it's going to take a long time. And then if you start applying effects, then it's going to take a long time. So now on my desktop, here's the movie that I created. It weighs in at only about 50 megabytes. And let's play it. And we see the slow motion and the transitions. And again, these are just standard cuts. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to create a second test. And I'm going to have the durations a little bit different, and I'm going to have some transitions. So let's go back into After Effects in the composition. And what I'm going to do now is maybe when I go from the fire into the lantern, instead of having it cut, it would be nice to have a nice dissolve in there. So I'm going to take the last frame, and by the way, we had, if you notice in the final render, we had some extra space left over. We had about 6 seconds left over because it didn't quite reach to the 20-second mark, and that's fine. So I'm going to take the last frame and move it to the right. I'm going to open up the duration of the lantern to the fullest and open up the fire some more. The reason why I'm doing that is so I want these two to overlap. And as you can see, they overlap just about 3.5 seconds of overlap. What I want to do now is, instead of just jumping from the fire layer to the layer above it when it comes in, is I'm just going to simply take the lantern layer, open up the opacity, okay, turn it down to 0, click the stopwatch to keyframe it, and then move somewhere to the right, bring up the opacity to 100, and that's about maybe a 1.5 second transition. Let's move this keyframe to the right even more. So now we have, and actually, let's open up the fire layer below it so that it stays longer. So we can open this up to about even 2.5 seconds. Much nicer. A 2.5 second transition is good for these images. When we go from the lantern into the brook now, we want a shorter transition. So now we're going to move the brook over, and we get just a little bit of an overlap here. Move the playback head to the end of the lantern layer. Now we can see we already have a keyframe here to have it fade out for 100%. So what we're going to do is go all the way to the left of the opacity setting to the little diamond, click the diamond, and that literally copies the last keyframe data and puts it where the playback head is. And now go here and go to 0. So we have 0 to 100. So let's see how it all looks. Okay, and what we can do now because this happens to end at about just before 18 seconds, we can actually shorten the duration of our composition. So what I'm going to do is go right here, look at our time code, 17 seconds, 18 frames. Go to Composition Settings, or Command K, and change the duration of the composition to 17 seconds and 18 frames. So that way there won't be any extra lag time at the end. And let's render it out again. Composition, pre-render. We can get rid of the last comp one that was in the render queue. And again, go to custom, make sure everything looks good. Yep, I'm going to render it at full size. And again, we want to click on the format options and go to H.264. Again, I recommend going to Apple's website and downloading it if you don't have it, and it'll automatically install it. And it should be available in After Effects when you open it. And there we go. So with these tools alone, that gives you a lot to think about, just telling a story using a combination of video images. Now you can also use photographic images and make them act like video. That will be in the next tutorial. So let's delete that, close out the render queue, look on the desktop, and there it is, Comp 1. Again, only 50 megabytes, which really isn't too bad. And I could have had a transition to the Xerox, but I really wanted it here. Look how nice that is. From flames to lantern. And fade out. And that brings us to the conclusion of video tutorial, and see you on the next one.